It's Alex here with Any Button Gaming and Asset Flip Gaming. I have Jason today from Stray Basilisk Games, developer of Steamhounds, an upcoming title that you can get on Steam. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your game and where the idea came from?
Sure. So Steamhounds is a kind of a mashup between like a JRPG style game and a turn-based, grid-based tactical game. The idea of the game is that you run a team of steampunk mercenaries who are taking on jobs for various shady factions who are kind of fighting for control and keeping the gears turning kind of under the surface of this big industrial city in which you all live. So as I say, gameplay-wise, it's kind of like a tactical combat game. The big twist that we've thrown into the game is that typically in these kind of games, your character will do their big attack and then they'll kind of stand idle, just politely waiting, kind of doing nothing for their next turn to roll around.
Yeah.
So we decided to switch that up a bit and introduced a system which we call stances, which let your character react to stuff which is happening when it's not their turn. So if they're like a supportive character, for example, maybe they can support one of their teammates, so whenever their teammate attacks, they'll jump in as well. If they're a defensive character, they can stand in front of one of their teammates and kind of bodyguard them. And you can use these stances to set up kind of combos and chain reactions and hopefully make the whole battle feel a bit more alive and kind of reactive than you typically see in these kind of games.
Yeah, it definitely works. The combat feels a lot more fluid for the inclusion. Was that something that you had sort of designed from the ground up, or was it something that sort of grew organically as you developed the game?
Yeah, so the stance system has definitely evolved, but it was one of the initial kind of sparks of inspiration that led to the whole game to kind of come about in the first place. So the kind of genesis of the idea was I don't know if you ever played XCOM at all.
Yeah, I did.
But there's a mechanic in that game called Overwatch.
Yeah.
Where at the end of your turn you can put a character on Overwatch mode, and then if an enemy moves in their line of sight, they'll take a pot shot at them, kind of a free shot.
Yeah.
So the initial idea behind Steamhounds was, okay, what if we took a JRPG style battle system, like a Final Fantasy style thing, and layered on top things like Overwatch? All the other stances are just kind of sprung from that initial kind of spark of inspiration. It's like once you've had the idea of, okay, Overwatch is an example of what a stance might be like. And then a whole load of ideas for different kind of stances will immediately come to mind once you start going down that avenue. And we've just leaned further and further into that aspect because we think it's what makes it unique and kind of quite satisfying as a player to kind of orchestrate and then watch these things play out. Or if you're playing competitively, to try and anticipate what your opponent's doing and sidestep or disrupt or dismantle the kind of formation and setup of stances they're angling for. So so it's been in there since the very beginning. Lots of things have changed, but it's kind of part of the initial core concept.
Yeah, definitely. It does add like a lot of strategy to your turn. When I was playing it, my first few games didn't go that well. I needed to take the time to actually read what the abilities did, and then after doing that, the amount of combinations that you can achieve and the disruptive combinations was really quite deep.
That's good to hear. The thing you're always aiming for is easy to learn and hard to master, or kind of simple to understand, but with a lot of complexity which kind of emerges from that and a lot of nuance once you really get to grips with the kind of nitty-gritty of the system. And we think the core of the game that we have now has more or less achieved that. So we're really happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. It's definitely got like a nice entry level, but once you spend a little bit of time with the system, it feels very deep. One of the things that I was doing when I was playing the game was initially it felt that I couldn't win a game without the berserker and the warrior. Once I kind of got to grips with the system, I realized that you could win with any combination of the three and felt that the balancing was amazing. I've not seen many games where you can win with any combination of three. Was that balancing that system, was that something that you had to work on quite a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the reason the Berserker and the Warrior are so easy to get started with is they're fairly straightforward, like damage-dealing characters for the most part.
Yeah.
They're kind of your upfront attackers, and they can do other things as well. But some of the other classes have more like utility than kind of outright offensive power. So you need to know some more of the subtleties of the system because they have abilities which affect kind of speed and turn order and stuff, which is a bit more nuanced than just stacking up a load of powerful attacks. So you definitely need to kind of understand how everything flows a bit more to use those effectively, I think. In terms of the actual balance, it's definitely something we've iterated on, and we're still improving, right, as we have people play test the game. And sometimes they'll find like a really powerful strategy which we hadn't kind of accounted for, so we'll need to adapt to that somehow. Ideally, every team lineup would be viable against every other one, and I don't think that's 100% achievable.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some team matchups which are kind of unbalanced in favor of another. So there's going to be an element of, meta games and or mind games in terms of what characters you pick in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's still experimenting with in competitive play what the format's going to be. Because a lot of the time you see, okay, there'll be like pick ban systems or like drafting mechanics or, the way a tournament's structured, for example,
Yeah.
as opposed to just being like a single battle where everyone picks their teams without having any knowledge about what their opponents pick. You can, if you pick poorly or kind of you're unlucky, you may end up in a kind of losing position from the start of the battle. So we're playing around now with how we structure and format, the broader competitive kind of gameplay to kind of account for that, because we won't be able to achieve like 100% balance in terms of every team lineup.
As you said, when people get to grips with the game as well, you become more aware of the subtleties of the stance system as well, and balance and all of that must be quite difficult. Spent a few hours playing it the other day, and I couldn't find a team that didn't work well together. Like, it was so well balanced.
That's really great to hear. I mean, right now we only have 5 playable
Yeah.
classes, and we're planning to have at least double that in the final game. And every time you add a class, not just adding complexity, you're kind of multiplying it.
Yeah.
So, it may get more difficult to like keep that up as we expand the roster. It's going to get kind of exponentially more difficult, but that's a challenge we're excited to be working on at the moment. I mean, in terms of how we actually achieve the balance, I mean, our starting point is we have a kind of basic kind of mathematical, like statistical model, which gives you a baseline. You can say, how fast is the character, how powerful are they, how much health have they got, and that can give you some sense of, those things being traded off against each other to have characters who are roughly equal in effectiveness. But when you get to things like, I don't know, abilities which let you move an opponent or prevent them from moving, or which like influence the turn order in more like subtle ways, it's very hard to put a number on like how useful those things are. So, we have some rough numbers we can apply to those for like how we initially balance a new character, but it always has to come down to like gameplay to kind of refine it from that point.
Yeah, of course. With the game having a focus on multiplayer, is the idea of progression, how are players going to get a sense of that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So because we want to have competitive play like on a level playing field as much as possible, we're leaning away from having you level up your characters themselves. So let's say you're doing matchmaking based on like player skill. If you then also have to matchmake based on like how leveled up their various characters are within their team, it becomes like completely unmanageable, I think. So we're leaning towards more the characters have like a fixed level of power. Everyone kind of has access to more or less the same pool of characters, so the progression will come through like a ranking system, kind of leaderboards. And in terms of the multiplayer, we have plans for like a season based system. So the idea that we're floating around and kind of prototyping now is that at the beginning of say a month or like a 2-week season, you'll ally yourself with a certain in-game faction, and then every multiplayer battle you do will be kind of gaining points for that faction. So there's like a turf war going on, and so then at the end of that season, maybe you get some points or kind of awards for being on the winning faction, or like being one of the top contributors to your faction, or just for like individual win-loss ratio and stuff like that. So we want to reward people in ways other than making them more powerful, because making them more powerful for winning just kind of stretches the balance too much.
No, of course. The sort of faction system as well, like that feeds really into the sort of steampunk genre, I think.
Yeah.
And it also reminds me a little bit at the minute of what's going on in World of Warcraft as well, with the sort of faction war that's going on between the Horde and the Alliance. And it's quite a nice feeling of progression when you're contributing towards like an overall group as well.
Mm-hmm. And it also brings in like the whole social aspect, right? Because you want to get your friends on board to help your faction win out. So it's not just, a series of matches with no kind of context against an opponent, which is all well and good because you're proving your own ability, I guess. But it gives some like context for like social stuff to go on as well, and for people to kind of plan and band together and encourage their friends to kind of jump on board. So hopefully that's another area.
Yeah, that's a really interesting progression system. The game does have a really quite nice aesthetic, and the avatars at the minute, they're placeholders. Is the style that you've got in the game at the moment, that's what you're going to have going forward?
Yeah, so the game that people see at the moment, all of the artwork you see in there is pretty much stock artwork or like programmer artwork, but we do like the way it looks.
Yeah.
So when we replace that with our own original stuff, it has to look at least as awesome as the stock artwork we're using.
Yeah.
And we're going to go along the same general lines in terms of pixel art characters in like a 3D low poly or kind of pixelated 3D environment. Yeah, so the basic aesthetic we're going to keep up. but we're just basically making the theming a bit more on point because our characters right now are a bit of a mishmash. Like some of them are kind of steampunky, others are a bit more traditional fantasy looking. There's some stuff going to be coming out in the very near future of our kind of the first looks at some of our original character designs, which we really hope people will like because they're shaping up to be pretty cool, I think.
The original artwork that you've got going at the minute, is that something that's going to be put into like the next build that people have access to?
Maybe not the next one because it would be kind of weird to switch out one by one because they won't quite fit. It will kind of look like a weird juxtaposition. So probably we'll wait until we have enough characters done to kind of switch out the current roster all at once. So there'll be builds released in the meantime with more kind of gameplay balance tweaks, like maybe even new characters, still using the stock artwork as we kind of evolve the core battle system. And once we have enough art assets to kind of switch everything out at once and make it look cohesive, we'll probably do that in one go.
Oh, that's awesome. And what at the minute, what is your goal for when you do release 1.0? Like, what's your sort of vision for the game once it's released?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends exactly what our kind of roadmap looks like, right? Like if we were to do an early access release, for example, we'd probably go with like a multiplayer only thing.
Yeah.
We do have designs for like more of a single player campaign, but obviously that's a whole lot of time and work up front to actually get that to a playable state. So it depends what we're kind of aiming for. We have a grand vision, but we also have ideas about what the minimum thing we can realistically get out there for, say, like an early access would be.
Oh, that makes sense. And when do you kind of hope to have that released?
I would say next year at the very earliest.
Okay.
We're still at the point now of kind of talking with potential publishers and working out what our path looks like in that, in the kind of business sense. So
yeah,
it's hard to say, right?
How have you found navigating the industry as a first-time developer?
I mean, it's been a learning process. As an indie dev, you kind of want to just get along with making the game, but you find yourself wearing a lot of other hats, right? So doing like marketing and PR stuff, or the business development, like talking to publishers and potential business partners and stuff. But no, it's fun and interesting, and there've been some people who helped along the way. And if you look around, there's a lot of good advice out there. I would say I enjoy it, but it's kind of like an endless time sink, right? I could spend all day doing like social media and marketing stuff if I had the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of an endless amount of work you could plow into all of the business side of things, and you need to keep focused on actually making the game at the same time.
Yeah, of course.
So not enough time in the day is kind of the overall feeling.
You've got quite a small team. It's 3 people.
Stray Basilisk, the core team is 3 people. There's me. I'm based just outside London in the UK, and then there's Paul and Andrew, who are based on one on the east and one on the west coast of the US. So we're spread across different countries and 3 different time zones, which has a whole lot of issues associated with that. There are some benefits, like for example, there's always someone around. There are lots of different events around the UK and US, and it makes it a bit easier for us to make it to those, or for one of us to make it to those kind of events. So there's some upsides, but communication-wise, it takes a bit of work. So
obviously, it's quite far apart. How did you come together as a group?
So we actually met through the internet. So it was through one of these game dev classifieds and one of these like looking for team kind of things. I think it was actually through Reddit that we all met. And a lot of these groups don't go too well. I think the reason it's worked for us is that when I initially posted up there, I already had something tangible. I already had like a rough prototype of the kind of basic system of the game up and running. Like a lot of these posts you see there, people will say, I need an artist and a composer and all of these things. Like I just have a kind of general vague idea for a game, but I at least had something like tangible to show, which meant I got a load of responses from like pretty talented people with good portfolios and stuff. So I had the luxury of going through and picking out some people who not only was their portfolios were really good, but we had a chance to chat and we kind of clicked and seemed to get along well. So, we actually met in person for the first time last month. So we had a booth at EGX or Res in London, and this was the first time that the team had actually all assembled together.
Okay.
Which is a kind of a surreal experience, but that was awesome, and thankfully we didn't all get on each other's nerves. So
yeah,
that was always a risk.
Yeah, of course. You've gone to games conventions to present Steamhounds. How has the reception been?
Yeah, the reception has generally been really good. definitely for people who are kind of into this genre, they seem to immediately understand what it is that we're trying to achieve here. They immediately click onto the start system and kind of get what makes that unique and interesting. So that's kind of validated that our design goals, are things that resonate with people. A lot of people also seem to like the artwork and the aesthetic, which is
Yeah.
surprising to me since it's a load of placeholder stuff. So I see all the kind of flaws there, and I see how lacking it is compared to like our ultimate vision of where we want the game to be.
Yeah.
But I think that's promising as well. And we've got a huge amount of playtest feedback. Like we capture data on all the games people play at these events, so it's hugely valuable to have a couple of hundred people sit down and play a battle, right? That's so informative because when you're working on a project yourself, it's really hard to have an outsider's perspective or a newcomer's perspective to understand what's
Yeah.
intuitive or what's confusing. So we've changed a whole load of stuff in terms of like the UI and the user experience and how everything flows together and how information is presented based on watching people play. And we've refined that kind of core quite a lot. And that's pretty much all thanks to showing the game at these live events.
And yeah, I never thought about that, like the data collection side of it. That's quite interesting, actually. You mentioned the artwork. That was one of the first things that struck me when I was playing it as well, was how nice the game looks. At the aesthetic and all of the characters, how they fit in within that setting. Yeah, it's really nice. Even the little bits like the illumination around the characters is quite nice as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's definitely something we're leaning into as well, like cool kind of lighting and stuff. I mean, that's what the new generation brings to pixel art, right? It's the ability to combine it with some cool lighting effects. So it still has that classic charm of pixel art, which tends to
Yeah.
age really well, but with a bit of kind of cool lighting stuff on top. That seems to be what the trend with modern pixel art stuff.
No, definitely. Really quite a nice art style. As you say, it ages quite well as well. You mentioned earlier as well that you've been speaking to publishers. Is that a route that you would like to go down, or would you prefer to remain independent?
Um, I mean, like I said, none of us have um, seen like a proper commercial game project through to completion before.
Yeah.
So to have that kind of knowledge and mentorship, as well as obviously the financial side of helping us to fund development, ideally we'd have somebody with that experience to kind of partner up with, realistically. But we definitely want to keep the kind of creative control and the indie spirit, even if we're working. There are indie publishers. I guess the word indie is kind of a bit ill-defined, right? If you have a
Yeah.
publisher, are you still indie? I think you can be. It depends kind of who the publisher is and what the aesthetic of the game is and the kind of scale you're working at, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. I think that that's maybe something that people that are playing the game aren't always aware of, is like the relationship between the developer and the publisher. They have so much more experience in presenting and marketing the game that you may not have within your core team.
And
When
that's really what indie devs, for the most part, are lacking, right? It's getting easier and easier to make a game from a technical standpoint, but to actually get it in front of people and to get it seen, that's where the challenge is now, I think. The number of games which are released every day on Steam is something crazy, right? You've got like a few hours on that front page of new releases, and then if you don't kind of ride the wave at that point and gather some attention, you kind of just fade into obscurity. So you need to be on the ball in terms of your marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's thousands of games are added to Steam every week. Um, and with that, are you looking to get the game published on curated stores like GOG or Epic Game Store?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a really compelling reason not to, we'd kind of want to make it available in as many places as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steam has the big problem of discovery, right? And obviously having these more curated stores can potentially help with that. I know there's a lot of controversy around Epic Store at the moment, but
Yeah.
in the long term, I think it's going to be a healthier thing for there to be more options in the market and more kind of competition between these stores. And I think you'd be kind of crazy not to put your game up in as many
I
places as
think,
possible, really.
yeah, I agree. There's been an effective monopoly in the PC market for about a decade now, and all it's kind of led to the issue of discoverability, as you said. So having those different platforms, especially for independent developers, must be really quite nice to have options to where to put your game.
Yeah, I think so. Because until now, everything's been so heavily focused on riding the Steam algorithm and optimizing things in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more options you have, the better, I think.
Do you have any projects that you have sort of in your mind for beyond Steamhounds, or are you so far deep into this project that you can't really look beyond it at the moment?
As an indie developer, like I have no shortage of kind of things which I'd love to work on. The issue is like not letting it distract you, to be honest.
Yeah.
So there are things we've played around with, like we've done a couple of like internal game jams where we take a couple of weeks to kind of work on a little prototype for something else to kind of explore new areas. So we have things like that which we could expand on. But then also depending on how Steamhounds fares, there's definitely opportunities for adding more content to that or sequels or kind of spin-off games in the same universe. We're not dead set on. So Steamhounds is like a tactical combat game,
Yeah.
and even though we all really like that genre, we don't want necessarily that to be the only thing that which we're known for in the long term. So we're open to kind of completely different stuff potentially.
That's quite cool. You mentioned continued support for Steamhounds. Is that something that you're looking into, sort of like extra characters or skins or DLC?
Yeah, I think so. So since we're focusing on multiplayer, you need some level of ongoing support, I think. And part of
Yeah.
that is it'd be great if we could do live events and have almost a kind of like esportsy competitive angle.
Okay.
It'd be awesome to have like a live Steamhounds tournament like you might get for something like Hearthstone or Magic or Pokemon or something like that.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit earlier about progression within the game, and because we're not going to really allow you to like level up your characters too much for the sake of game balance, we need other ways to kind of have people unlock things as they progress and as they achieve various milestones. So things like skins and unlockables are a kind of obvious option there. Yeah, and kind of things like rolling out additional characters in the future, or for our kind of the way we envision the single player campaign, adding kind of new kind of chapters to that is definitely something we could do in the future as well. So there are definitely, the game is designed in such a way that we can expand on what we have.
At the moment, do you sort of know how the single player campaign is going to be structured, or is that something that's still quite in development?
Yeah, so we definitely we know what we aspire for it to be.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't talk too much about it because it depends. It kind of depends on budget and business constraints, like to what extent we'll actually be able to
Of course, yeah.
really flesh that out. The basic idea, though, is that there'll be more of a management layer to it, whereby you have a roster of mercenaries and you kind of assign them to different missions, in a way somewhat similar to XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, maybe.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
and then those missions themselves will be where the actual turn-based tactical battles take place. But there'll basically be a management layer on top to give some kind of context to that, and it'll be about working for these factions and managing your reputation with them, like getting in with a faction but not pissing off the other ones too much, and there are kind of repercussions coming back to you. So kind of riding that line, trying to make a buck in this world of like forces who are bigger than you, but kind of trying to stay afloat.
That sounds quite interesting. Is it going to be sort of leaning into like an RPG element in that sense, or is it kind of, I guess, more similar to the campaign structure in, say, XCOM?
Yeah, more the latter, I think. So rather
Okay.
than there will be like, narrative and story to it, but it won't necessarily be like a story which you're playing through as such. It'll be more like, here is the city, there are factions with various machinations and things going on, and you're trying to kind of ride those waves and then maybe responding to events as they happen. So it's a bit more dynamic and less kind of
Sort of like a novel situation in
yeah,
some
exactly
sense.
that. Yeah, you
Yeah.
want to create interesting situations and dilemmas.
That sounds really interesting. It's something that you can keep playing as well. Nice to have the balance between the single player and the multiplayer option as well.
Yeah, what we definitely don't want to do is have like the JRPG thing where you have a big world map and a huge, like detailed tile maps of all of these environments and areas, because for a small team that's just kind of not, that's an unrealistic amount of content to make. So it's going to be a bit more of
Of
a
course.
procedural management kind of thing.
Guess that kind of feeds into the idea of novel situations anyway. Like, feels like you're discovering something new each time you play it.
Yeah,
If,
yeah. You might say, okay, this playthrough, I really want to focus on doing missions for this particular faction, and then maybe you'll learn a bit more about them and what they're up to, and their kind of history and stuff will be kind of revealed to you as you take on missions for them.
that sounds like quite a cool campaign. Look forward to playing that. Um, yeah, I just got a couple of questions that are kind of unrelated to the game. Are you a gamer yourself?
I would say so. I mean, I spend enough of my time kind of thinking about and playing and researching and studying and making games. That's pretty much a massive part of my life. So if I'm not a gamer, yeah, I'm not sure who is. Yeah,
What games are you playing at the moment, if when you've got the time?
I will say that I don't spend as much time just playing games as I would really like to.
Yeah,
Like a lot of the time, I'll find out about something new and I'll get into that research mode where I'm trying to understand the game and kind of deconstruct it. And it's not that often that I'm able to just sit back and just experience something. Like my go-to game at the moment to just blow off steam is Rocket League because
yes.
yeah, it's such a I like kind of physics games which are just there's a joy in just the basic interaction with them. They just viscerally feel
Yeah,
really good to play around
absolutely.
with. So that's something I can just play and kind of switch off and just kind of enjoy for a couple of hours. I've also
Yeah,
recently started playing the remaster of Shadow of the Colossus.
I love that game.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
one of these classic games that I never played when it first came out. Finally catching up on that.
how are you finding that? I played it when it first came out, and I remember the controls being maybe a little bit janky.
That's definitely a factor. Like there's some frustration in the controls, I would say. I mean, the thing that strikes you, excuse me, the thing which strikes you about it is how just the cinematic aspect of it is so good. Like and considering when it was released as well, it really broke ground in terms of just how it looks and the framing and the camera and all of that kind of stuff. I would
Yeah,
say it to some extent it sacrifices gameplay by leaning so heavily into that, and sometimes it's yeah,
yeah,
there's a bit of jankiness to the kind of climbing around, and maybe it's because I'm just getting into it, but it doesn't, you know, playing it isn't quite as good as like watching it in a sense, but
no,
there's
that
still some
makes
amazing
sense.
stuff in there.
I felt kind of similar. I played The Last Guardian when it came out. I think that sort of is maybe like a hallmark of the Team Eco games. Again, the cinematic struck me about that as well. Yeah, I don't have any more questions. Is there anything that you would like to go through about Steamhounds that we haven't covered yet?
I could talk all day. Um, you want,
Yeah,
if there's any big topics we haven't really covered yet. Um, Maybe not. I mean, I could talk a bit about the kind of status of the project as it is now.
yeah, that would be
So
great.
yeah, so right now we have a playable demo out there, which is at the moment that's free for people to get into. It's basically an open playtest slash prototype kind of stage at the moment. As I said, all of the artwork is placeholder, but the core gameplay is there, so you can get a sense for the basic kind of core loop of the gameplay. And in the demo, as it stands, you can basically play individual battles. So you
Yeah.
can play like a skirmish against the AI, or you can play against somebody online, or you can also do like a hot seat thing where you pass the keyboard back and forth and play on the same machine against somebody else. So to get into that demo, you just need to join our Discord. If you jump into the Discord, you get immediate kind of access to that. And the
Okay.
Discord is also our hub for kind of getting feedback from playtesters and kind of our matchmaking hub as well. So if you want somebody to battle against, you can post in there.
Okay, that's
Um,
cool. So you've got like the little kind of community going at the moment.
yeah. So occasionally we'll also run tournaments in the Discord, which has been pretty fun in the past. So if people are interested in the competitive side and want to try and break the game
Yeah.
and find a dominant strategy, then it's definitely at a state where it's pretty playable in a competitive sense at the moment. Yeah, and we're kind of working on, we've got the kind of core of the game now pretty much nailed down. Both fleshing out the content, so adding more characters and adding like the kind of framing structure and progression and context to the battles, which we talked about, and then also the other kind of big push is the kind of visual overhaul to
Yeah.
replace all the stock artwork gradually with original stuff. If people just want to follow our progress, Twitter's also another good place to go to. So we post regular progress stuff. We'll be posting some stuff about our new character designs, before they actually make it into a build. There'll be some progress and kind of concept art stuff coming out via our Twitter. So if you don't want to jump fully into the Discord playtesting stuff, Twitter's probably the next best place. We also have a Steam page up, so we're coming soon on Steam.
So will that be an alpha build?
Yeah, so it's a possibility that will go into early access, in which case we probably do that through Steam.
Yeah.
But right now, if you sign up, if you wishlist us on the Steam page, you'll get notified when the kind of final full release comes out. I had to get that stuff in here at the end, or the rest of the team would kill me.
No, absolutely, absolutely. All of those links will be in the video description, and they'll also be in the transcribed article as well on Any Button Gaming.
Yeah, and if you're really interested in the project, then definitely jump into the Discord because we're on there all the time talking with players and getting their feedback and implementing stuff based on their suggestions. So we're pretty kind of active in there.
Do highly recommend checking it out. The gameplay is really tight and the aesthetics is fantastic as well. Yeah, I spent 5 to 10 hours playing it the other day and I loved every minute of it.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today, Jason. It's much appreciated.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.